So for a good while now, there have been side discussions around improvements being considered to the Blitz format. This has not only been implied in interviews and dev talks, but also directly stated in an earlier BNS announcement. And while the format isn't anywhere near as bad as some folks like to claim it is, the differences between Skirmish Season 9 and Skirmish Season 10 definitely highlighted how fragile the format can be. So my thesis statement for today's video is that I believe Blitz can be helped with one simple, straightforward change that actually serves to put it in line with Classic Constructed, a 55-card deck expanding the sideboard. A huge shout out to our channel members for supporting what we do here. If you want to get involved with the channel and the Dice Commando community, please consider joining as a channel member. Remember, these videos are only possible with your support. You can show that support with a like, a subscribe, and by leaving us a comment and sharing your feedback. Community first, and go Commando. Hey there, my flesh and blood friends. Welcome back to Dice Commando and Go Again, a fabulous cast, and thanks so much for tuning in today as I am talking about a proposed change for the Blitz format. Now, it's no secret, right, that there's a narrative that persists in some parts of the flesh and blood community that Blitz is a challenged format. And while I personally believe that Blitz is not only fun, but also very necessary for the health of flesh and blood, there's no denying that balance of the format can be, well, difficult. The difference between Skirmish Season 9 and Skirmish Season 10 has clearly shown that a tiny turn of a knob can mean the difference between a 30% win rate dominant hero and a wide meta with 20 plus viable heroes. As such, I believe that any changes and improvements to the format should not lie in functionally changing the format itself, but rather in tweaking the parameters to allow it to be more easily balanced, in effect decreasing volatility. With Crucible of War in July of 2020 came a new and exciting way to play Flesh and Blood, 52-card Blitz. One hero, a 40-card deck, and 11 weapon or equipment slots. It's fun, it's fast, it's 52-card Blitz. And this held for just shy of 3 years, until Blitz underwent its first major evolution, debuting as an experiment in July of 2023, headed into Skirmish Season 7. Following that experiment, the changes were upheld and went final on August 16, 2023, effectively putting the format in line with Classic Constructed in terms of inventory loadout, but with one exception. 40 cards remained as a non-flexible deck size. No longer did the hero count towards the 52 card count, effectively expanding the inventory loadout by 1. And while many Blitz fans at the time, myself admittedly included, were initially cautious on the changes to the non-fixed decks, the results were very clear. The August 2023 changes were nothing short of a massive success in bolstering the health of the format. From December 2023 and the end of Skirmish Season 8 through the early spring of 2024, the Blitz format was in one of the best and most balanced spots it had ever been. But in spring of 2024, two things happened. The release of Zen, a clearly overtuned hero, and also the return of traditional wizard in the form of Blaze. Now, an overtuned hero, hey, stuff happens, okay? And yes, while it was extremely unfortunate that he was left untouched at the same time changes were being made in the sister format, and thus, let's be honest, allowed to tarnish our first skirmish season that we'd had in over 8 months, no changes to the format itself can prevent this type of design-accountable situation. After all, blaming Blitz for Zen being utterly broken during the Bonds era is completely unfair, given that at the same time he was dominant in CC and Living Legend also. But Blaze and the return of traditional wizard to the format following Kano's exit in Skirmish 8 is another story. And now hold on, pump the brakes, this is not a wizard is busted conversation. In fact, I truly believe that balanced wizard is a really necessary presence in the format, keeping redline decks in check and, ironically, slowing the format down just a tad. Rather, Wizard's return to the format highlighted just how valuable the sideboard slots are in Blitz, and, as I'll show today, how much more constrained they are than in Classic Constructed. See, with Kano's exit in Skirmish Season 8, the need for AB3 disappeared. AB2 was the new standard to handle Emperor, and some heroes could even go as low as AB1 simply to ensure protection against someone like Vincent. Because, with cards like Wildfire and other snowballing arcane damage cards off the table, due again to Kano's LL, the field was able to shift away from specific use prevention cards like Oasis, and instead move to more generically useful cards like Sigil. The net overall impact was that these very limited sideboards were able to become more fungible, allowing for prep into a wider field, as opposed to having to tech for specific matchups. And the result was that the Blitz format saw a reduction in the number of polarizing matchups, and we enjoyed one of the widest and most balanced Blitz metas that we had arguably ever seen. And to be clear, this wasn't because Kano and the Wizards were gone, at least not in the truest sense. It was merely a byproduct of their absence, given the constraints of the current Blitz sideboard. And that leads me to my thesis statement for today's video, expanding the Blitz sideboard to 15 cards for a total of a 55 card list plus a hero would not only greatly increase the health of the Blitz format, but as I'll show, would actually put it in line with classic constructed sideboard. Now look, I get it. We hear players say stuff like this all the time. I even see folks asking for more CC sideboard slots from time to time. So I understand why your initial reaction might be what it is. But I promise stick with me and I'll prove not only why it's necessary, but also why 55 cards is the correct number to bring it in line with what we've deemed appropriate for the game via CC. Now first, I do want to acknowledge that from an anecdotal perspective, maintaining the net number at 52 is a head nod to the origins of the format. But I question if, back when they first designed the format, if it had been set up to have a legitimate sideboard at the time, if different numbers wouldn't have been chosen from the get-go. And sure, the 52 card Blitz thing is pretty neat. It is. But let's be honest here, it's already kind of past that anyway, since we removed the hero from the count. And ultimately, a more balanced and healthy format is the thing that matters most. So why is 55 the correct number? To understand that, let's start by comparing the two formats. Blitz has a 40 card set deck with 12 inventory slots for a total of 52 cards. Classic Constructed has a 60 card minimum deck with a total of 80 cards. Now, on the surface, looking at these two side by side from a pure ratio standpoint, they are actually relatively matched, right? Blitz's 12 card inventory is roughly 23% of the total allotment, and CC's 20 cards represent 25% of the total allotment. For all intents and purposes, that's matched. One could certainly argue that the sizes of the sideboard scale appropriately. However, the fundamental mechanic in Flesh and Blood, the start full mechanic, dictates that at a minimum, a hero will start with 4 pieces of equipment and a weapon. That's 5 slots at a minimum, and these 5 cards form a functional inventory base. The number of base cards does not scale between the two formats. And this is before we consider potential dual-handed and arcane barrier includes. Many classes will need to include up to 3 AB capable equipment. And if you're a hero that dictates 2 weapons, woof, now you're very limited. But even ignoring that and focusing just on the base 5, one can immediately see the problem. Once we normalize the inventory for this absolute minimum, we see a functional 7 card inventory for Blitz, while CC enjoys a functional 15 cards. What this means is that in CC, a hero could run up to 5x playsets of a card in their sideboard, whereas in Blitz, a hero can only run 3x full playsets with 1 additional slot left over. And again, this is before we consider AB. And in a game of polarizing matchups that in many cases depend on you having access to specific tech, you can quickly see the problem, right? At a basic level, CC lets one tech for 2 to 3 more archetypes than does Blitz. And that's why, from a purely technical standpoint, the lack of Wizard for the 8 months after Skirmish 8 had such a significant impact on the balance of the Blitz format. Removing an entire archetype from the format during that period removed the need for an entire tech slot, and as a result, further evened up the field. So with all that understood, we can outline our available options. Either we accept Blitz as a format with more polarizing matchups, we remove archetypes from Blitz, or we increase the ability to tech for them. 2 of those options, in my opinion, are pretty unacceptable, but the third is quite easy and makes a lot of sense. Under the objective of making Blitz format as healthy as possible while including everyone, the conclusion to me is quite clear. Option number 3, increase the sideboard, is the answer. If we again compare the 2 formats, this time accounting for the base 5, we see that CC's functional 15 represents 18.75% of the 80 card total. This is compared to Blitz, where the functional 7 represents 13.4% of the current 52 card total. So under the assumption that we want to match CC's sideboard weight, which I think makes sense, treating a playset as 2 or 3, of course, depending on the format, you can see from the table here that a 55 card deck will give us a value closest to that of CC. A 15 card sideboard brings the deck total to 55 cards and correlates to a functional sideboard of 10 cards, correlating to a possibility of 5x playsets of cards. This 55 number not only puts the functional sideboard at roughly the same percentage as Classic Constructed, but, and more important than just simply the percentage, is that this translates to a potential 5 playsets of cards, putting it in line with Classic Constructed. Conceptually, and yes, of course, understanding the need for AB or alternative equipment, this allows each format to tech against roughly the same number of archetypes in Blitz that we would in CC. And thus, this is why I come to the conclusion that Blitz can be improved with this one simple change. But, okay, I get it. There's numbers and there's theory, and then there's reality. So let's go ahead and look at a couple case studies. What you see now is my current Dorinthea Quicksilver Prodigy deck. Quickie P is a 1-weapon hero, so after the basic 4 equipment loadout, I'm left with 7 sideboard slots. Once I use 3 of these slots to go to AB3, I'm left with 4 remaining cards. This means that, in essence, I have the ability to tech against 2 other archetypes. Now, because I play Nourishing Emptiness in my main board, I have the luxury of a main board Pauper, and as such, I've skewed to 1 Pauper to tech against Illusionist, 2 copies of Oasis, and 1 Decimator Axe so that I don't just auto-lose to Riptide. It's not as robust of a tech against Illusionist as I'd like, but it does at least provide some minimal protection. However, that's it. 4 cards to tech against an entire field. No room for Poison the Well, no room for Arcane Polarity, no room for Fatigue tech, and thank God Enigma isn't preferred in Blitz because I'm unable to tech unblockable damage. Imagine how many polarizing matchups could be mitigated with a simple 3-card additional add. In another example, let's look at the most disadvantaged class of them all when it comes to sideboard space, our non-Mystic Assassins. Not only are they dual-wielding, using up 1 additional slot, but part of their identity is daggers, which often lie in the sideboard. Once you pack in the AB and an extra dagger or 2, you effectively have the freedom to tech against 1 archetype. And now sure, you can argue that the selection of the different daggers is an inherent flexibility to that end, but it still isn't a pauper or a prevention effect. On the flip side, let's look at my Aurora Blitz deck. Aurora is a single-wielding hero and has AB3 built into her equipment through AB1 on the boots and AB2 on the carapace. But running that loadout, I can actually have full 7 slots with which to tech, room for arcane tech, poppers, and a plan for fatigue. For the heroes that have such limited sideboard space, they have to make the unfortunate decision to just accept and auto-lose against their worst matchups, utilizing their tech space to lean into matches where they'll at least have a fighting chance. Now sure, it remains an unavoidable reality of these games that not all heroes and classes will have equal and equivalent access to everything. We do honestly accept that, but one can at least acknowledge how, with such limited flexibility in sideboards, the likelihood of running into a non-winnable matchup is significantly higher with the less tools at their disposal, and especially in a design environment that is so heavily reliant upon silver bullet cards with which to get things done, we again see the value of the sideboard into this argument. So it tracks then that my point is supported. The addition of 3 additional sideboard slots represents, to decks like these, an entire additional archetype they can protect against, leveling the play field at least just a bit. And ultimately, the better we can provide leveling, the greater the reduction in polarizing and frustrating matchups, right? Now, I get it. Someone out there is saying to the screen, well, this just shows we don't need to increase sideboard. LSS just needs to print more options with AB built in. And while that is a correct statement in terms of reducing sideboard demand, remember that CC would have access to those cards as well. So as such, this doesn't serve to close the gap between the formats. Put simply, without increasing sideboard space, Blitz will always have a disproportionately higher propensity for polarizing matchups. And let's be clear here, I'm not asking for an infinite sideboard such that I can tech for every possible matchup. But what I am asking for here is for the Blitz format to at least be matched to CC. I believe the only reason that Blitz is where it is today in terms of deck size is because of the historical 52-card Blitz structure, which we've moved on from already. So my friends, it's time to change. Let's bring Blitz up to the same level as CC in terms of tech slots, and lower the number of no-win scenarios within the format. This will serve to increase diversity and promote creativity, which arguably is the best part of Blitz. Thanks for watching, my friends. Let me know what you think, and go Commando.